Your blood ain't American. Pete Hegseth's words cracked through the chamber like a rifle shot, live before 22 million Americans. Gasps ricocheted off marble walls as Jasmine Crockett's fingers tightened around a folded flag, her eyes locked on the man draped in stars and stripes. Tom, what could she unleash in the next breath that would turn his insult into the most explosive moment Congress has seen in decades? The U.S. Capitol's main hearing room felt like a pressure cooker. TV lights from CNN and Fox burned hot, every camera locked on two people, Jasmine Crockett and Pete Hegseth. Jasmine sat steady in a Navy suit, jaw tight. Across from her, Pete's military ribbons flashed under the lights, his back straight, chin high, wearing the half-smile of a man certain he'd win. The table between them was a line in the sand. In the gallery, veterans filled the rows, unit caps, wheelchairs, medals, folded flags. They weren't here for sound bites. They wanted answers. On the table, military budget cuts hitting minority veterans hardest. A move that could crown a hero or end a career. The air was tight, every sound sharp. A bolt was coming, and everyone would feel it. Jasmine leaned forward, sliding a thick stack of papers across the table. Pages stamped with budget codes, red circles, and black ink numbers stared up from the wood. "Show him $78 million, she said evenly, cut from programs for minority veterans, while spending on public relations jumped by nearly 30%. The words hung in the air like smoke. Pete didn't let her finish. You're just performing for the cameras, Congresswoman." His voice was sharp enough to slice through the stillness, and the gallery reacted. A low ripple of murmurs sweeping from row to row. A woman in the back shook her head. A young man in a wheelchair narrowed his eyes. Jasmine didn't blink. "I'm performing," she said, "for those who served and were forgotten." Her tone was steady, but it carried a weight that pulled every eye back to her. Pete leaned in, elbows on the table, voice dropping until it was low, hot, and unmistakably personal. "Your skin might be in Congress, but your blood ain't American." The room froze. Audible gasp broke the silence like glass hitting stone. In the gallery, a veteran gripped his cane so tight his knuckles turned white. Camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts. Jasmine's expression didn't change, but something in the set of her shoulders told the world she'd heard every word, and she wouldn't forget them. When patriotism is questioned in front of the entire nation, how do you answer without saying a word? Jasmine didn't fire back. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she slid her hand slowly into the leather bag by her chair, the sound of the zipper almost loud in the silence. From inside, she drew a worn black and white photograph, its edges curled, the surface scratched by time. She set it down in front of her, then turned it toward Pete. The image was unmistakable. A young black soldier in a crisp W-Durner's uniform, eyes fierce under his helmet. Clarence Crockett, her grandfather, the man who bled out on the sands of Normandy after carrying 3 white soldiers to safety. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Pete's gaze flicked down and stayed there half a second too long, his eyes narrowing as if he'd seen something familiar in the young soldier's face. A muscle in his jaw twitched before he looked back up. Jasmine's voice was low, but it carried to the farthest corner of the room. "Before you talk about blood," she said, "you might want to know whose it was." In the gallery, someone let out a breath they didn't know they'd been holding. A camera light blinked red as CNN cut its ambient feed, isolating the shot for every living room in America. The photo stayed between them, a silent, unshakable witness. The air felt heavier now, charged with something deeper than politics. And yet behind Pete's still face there was the faintest flicker, a tell that this picture wasn't just history to him. What story does that photograph hide? And why would Pete wish it stayed buried? Jasmine kept her hand on the photo, her thumb brushing the worn corner like she'd done it 100 times before. "His name was Clarence Crockett," she began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of decades. "Private first class. Normandy, 1944. She didn't look at her notes. She didn't need to. "He was 23 when the ramp dropped on his landing craft," she continued. "Bullets tore into the water. Men fell around him. And still, he carried 3 wounded soldiers, all white, through chest-deep surf and into the arms of medics." Her eyes swept the room, catching veterans in the gallery. He went back for a fourth and never came back. A hush fell so deep you could hear the faint whir of the cameras. Jasmine's voice dropped lower. Despite what he did, his body wasn't returned with full honors. His name isn't etched on the Arlington wall, not because he wasn't brave enough, but because he wasn't the right color for the history they wanted to write. In the front row, an older veteran in a Navy cap slowly nodded, his lips pressed tight. A younger man in a wheelchair wiped his eyes. Even some lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Pete didn't move. His expression was locked in place, but his fingers drummed once against the table, just once, before going still. Jasmine let the silence work for her. She didn't need to fill it. Every person in that chamber already knew what it meant. And somewhere in that silence was the question hanging over them all. If a man could give everything for his country and still be erased, what did that say about the country? Jasmine paused, then slowly drew a perfectly folded American flag from her bag. The navy cloth was worn smooth from decades of being held. She lifted it for the cameras. "This," she said, eyes locked on Pete, "is all my family got back." A beat of silence. "You want to see American blood?" Her voice cut through the room. "It's folded in this triangle." The room went still. The kind of stillness that makes you aware of your own breathing. Even Pete's jaw shifted, tightening just enough to betray the impact. From the gallery came the faint sound of someone clearing their throat. Not to speak, but to keep from breaking. A dozen camera shutters fired at once. The flag's image was already on Twitter before Jasmine lowered it to the table. Clarence Crockett lit up timelines in real time. Veterans posting photos of their own folded flags, strangers typing out thank yous under the clip. Pete didn't look at the screen, but he could hear the murmurs. Jasmine leaned back slightly, her hand still resting on the flag, as if daring him to say it again. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded, and everyone in that chamber could feel the trigger waiting to be pulled. And in that silence was an unspoken truth. Some symbols are heavier than the men who challenge them. Pete straightened in his chair, forcing his voice into a calm that didn't quite reach his eyes. "He still doesn't prove anything," he said, each word measured, as if keeping control was the only thing keeping him from cracking. His gaze flicked to the flag, then back to Jasmine, but he didn't reach for it. Jasmine didn't blink. Her hand stayed planted on the folded triangle like she was anchoring it to the table. "Doesn't prove anything?" she repeated, her voice low but cutting through the room like steel on stone. She leaned forward just enough that the cameras caught the fire in her eyes. "That flag soaked my family's blood before it ever touched your boots." The reaction was instant. Gas rippled across the gallery, a sound raw enough to pierce the tension. Camera flashes ignited from every corner, freezing the moment into 1,000 still frames that would live online within minutes. Somewhere in the back, a veteran whispered "damn" under his breath, not in disrespect, but in recognition of a blow that had landed. Pete's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening on the table's edge. He leaned forward, voice low but sharp enough to cut. "Waving a flag and a sob story doesn't make you right, Congresswoman. Policy isn't built on feelings." The gallery murmured, some in outrage, some in agreement. The flag sat between them, a silent witness neither man-made law nor political spin could erase. Jasmine didn't push further. She didn't need to. The clash had already sent sparks through the room, through the wires, through the country. And as the air settled, heavy with the truth she just dropped, one thing became clear. Clarence's story was powerful, but it wasn't the only truth Pete Hegseth had fought to keep buried. Jasmine let the silence hang just long enough for the weight of her last words to settle. Then she slid another document from her stack, the paper crisp, the red ink impossible to ignore. "Now let's talk about $78 million, she said, her voice steady, deliberate. That's the amount missing from the Minority Veterans Support Program budget." She tapped the page once, the sound sharp in the stillness. Pete shifted in his chair, but didn't look down at the document. "Necessary reallocation," he said flatly, almost dismissively. "If funds were better spent elsewhere." The words landed cold like an afterthought. Jasmine tilted her head, a faint, incredulous smile on her lips. "Better spent than on the men and women who wore the uniform and came home needing help?" She didn't raise her voice, but something in her tone made it impossible to look away. The cameras caught the gallery's reaction in crisp detail. An older veteran shaking his head slowly, lips pressed tight. A younger man with an empty sleeve, where his arm used to be, leaned forward in his wheelchair, eyes locked on Pete. A woman holding a folded flag clutched it tighter to her chest. Jasmine slid the paper closer to Pete, letting it rest just inside his reach. 78 million vanished from the people who needed it most, and you called it necessary. Her gaze didn't waver. Explain that to them. Pete's jaw flexed once, but no answer came right away. In the pause, you could hear the click of a camera lens and the faint hum of the air vents overhead. The moment felt like the first crack in a wall, small but impossible to ignore. And once the wall starts to crack, you can never control which way it falls. Jasmine didn't wait for Pete to fill the silence. She reached for a new sheet from her stack, but this one was different. Thicker paper, official letterhead, stamped with the Department of Defense seal. She held it up so the cameras could get a clean shot. "This, she said, is your signature, Mr. Secretary." She dated 3 months before those cuts. Pete's eyes flickered, just for a second. Jasmine read aloud, her voice clear enough to slice through the quiet. "Minority outreach equals low ROI. Prioritize veteran image campaigns." The words landed like a grenade. Murmurs swelled in the gallery. Not the restless shuffling of bored spectators, but the sharp, angry rustle of people who just heard the truth they suspected all along. In the second row, a veteran shook his head, muttering something under his breath. A journalist 2 seats over from the cameras typed furiously on a laptop, hitting tweet before Jasmine even lowered the page. The notification chime from someone's phone in the gallery cut through the tension. The quote was already bouncing across the internet. Pete adjusted his posture, gripping the table edge. That memo was part of a larger... He began, but Jasmine didn't let him finish. Part of a larger strategy to look good in photo ops while cutting the legs out from under the people who actually served? She leaned in slightly, not breaking eye contact. The gallery went silent again, waiting. Pete's mouth opened, then closed. He settled back into his chair, eyes hard, but his hands betrayed him. A subtle tightening, a knuckle crack. And in that moment, the narrative shifted. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. This was about proof. And once you have proof, you can aim it like a weapon. Jasmine let the memo's words linger in the air, then turned toward the gallery. "Hold on, Mr. Chairman," she said. "I'd like to call a witness." A door at the side of the chamber opened, and in walked a man in a plain gray suit, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes scanning the room like he wasn't sure he should be there. "State your name for the record," Jasmine prompted. "Anakunai Raymond Ellis," he said, voice trembling. "Former aide to Secretary Hegseth." A low buzz moved through the gallery. Everyone knew this was no ordinary testimony. Jasmine stepped aside so the cameras had a clean shot. "Inanari, Mr. Ellis, in your role, were you aware of the budget changes we've discussed?" Raymond nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am, I was in the meetings." He glanced at Pete, then back to Jasmine. "They didn't forget the minorities," he said, voice cracking just enough for the mics to catch. "They ignored them on purpose." The room erupted. Veterans muttered curses under their breath. Journalists leaned forward in their seats, and camera shutters popped like rapid gunfire. Pete's aides bent toward him in urgent whispers, their eyes darting toward the press row. Pete's jaw tightened, his face an iron mask, but the rhythm of his breathing gave him away. Jasmine didn't move, didn't smile. She just let the noise swell until the chairman's gavel called for order. Raymond shifted on his feet. "It wasn't a mistake," he added, almost to himself. "Nari, it was policy." The words hit harder than a shout, sinking into the walls and into every recorder in the room. And in that instant, the stakes changed. If they could bury $78 million, what else could they hide? The room was still buzzing from Raymond Ellis's confession when Jasmine reached for a small black device on her desk. She didn't say what it was. She just pressed a button, and a voice filled the chamber. "I lost a leg," the voice said, shaky, breaking between breaths, "and I still can't get a doctor." The sound of muffled sobbing followed, raw and unfiltered, echoing off the marble walls. It wasn't the voice of a statistic or a case file. It was a living, breathing veteran, carrying pain that no one in power had fixed. The gallery went quiet, every head turned toward the speakers. Even the cameras seemed to hold still, their little red lights burning in the silence. So Jasmine let the clip play out. The choked inhale, the pause, the hollow way the voice said, "I served. I gave everything." Pete shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "Trauma makes people exaggerate," he said flatly, as if those words could smooth over what everyone had just heard. The reaction was immediate. Boos broke out from the gallery. Sharp, loud, impossible to ignore. A veteran in the second row muttered something too low for the mics, but the anger in his voice was clear. The chairman's gavel pounded once, twice, but it didn't erase the sound of that recording hanging in the air. Jasmine didn't look at Pete. She didn't need to. The point had been made, not by her voice, but by the voice of someone the system had left behind. And in that moment, the hearing wasn't just about numbers or memos anymore. It was about the cost of being forgotten. The boos were still echoing when Jasmine's gaze drifted to the second row of the gallery. There, among the veterans and reporters, sat a woman in a tailored navy dress, hands clasped in her lap. Pete's wife. Her shoulders were stiff, but her head had dipped low, eyes fixed on the floor like she couldn't watch what was unfolding. Jasmine let the silence stretch for just a beat before she spoke. "This isn't about your image," she said, her voice calm but heavy, carrying across the room. She didn't look at Pete when she said it. Her eyes stayed on the veterans. It's about their pain." The words landed differently than the jabs and crossfire that had come before. This was a gut punch wrapped in truth, and the room felt it. Someone in the back row muttered, "Damn right." A younger vet pulled out his phone, fingers moving fast. By the time Jasmine sat back in her chair, the moment had already left the building and hit the internet. On Twitter, the hashtag #TheirPainNotYourImage lit up like a flare, spreading clip by clip, the camera panning from the folded flag to Pete's unreadable face to the veterans in the gallery. Comments poured in, "She's speaking for us. This is what leadership looks like." Pete shifted in his seat, his expression tightening as he glanced toward his wife. She still wasn't looking at him, and in a room built for politics, that kind of silence spoke louder than any headline. Pete's knuckles were white against the table edge, his eyes narrowing as if the room itself had turned against him. He leaned forward, his voice sharp and booming, cutting through the air like a crack of thunder. "You're just a race-baiting loudmouth." The words landed like a slap. A few gasps rippled through the gallery, but most people just stared. Not at Pete, but at Jasmine, waiting to see if she'd snap back. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, she leaned in slightly, her tone low but crystal clear. "The louder I get," she said, every syllable deliberate, "the more you remember who you tried to silence." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet confidence in her delivery was louder than any shout. The camera zoomed tight, catching the contrast. Pete's flushed face and rigid jaw against Jasmine's steady gaze. The tension in the room was almost physical now, pressing in from every side. Even the chairman's gavel hesitated, as if interrupting would rob the moment of its gravity. From the back row, a veteran whispered to the man beside him, "She just flipped it on him." Outside the chamber, in newsrooms and living rooms, that clip was already finding its way onto screens. And yet, this battle wasn't over. Because while the air in the hearing room was heavy and still, beyond those walls, voices were beginning to gather. They were about to get louder. Much louder. By the time the hearing room emptied that night, the outside world had already taken sides. Across America, timelines were flooding with images of folded flags. Some crisp and ceremonial, others worn soft from decades of being held. Each photo came with a story. From California, a Marine's widow posted, "This flag is all I have left. A Congresswoman Crockett speaks for families like mine." In Ohio, a young Iraq War veteran held up his flag in the front seat of his truck. "We know who fights for us and who doesn't." One post cut through them all. The grainy photo of a white Vietnam veteran in his kitchen, cap pulled low, holding a flag at his chest. His caption was only 12 words. "Clarence Crockett saved my father. I'll defend his granddaughter any day." The hashtag Clarence Crockett roared to life, climbing into the top 3 trends by sunrise. News anchors replayed Jasmine's folded flag moment on a loop, while veterans groups began tagging elected officials, demanding answers. In small towns and big cities, from VFW halls to kitchen tables, the conversation wasn't just about budgets anymore. It was about the weight of a promise. The promise the flag was supposed to keep, and the people willing to break it. Inside the Pentagon, aides scrambled to track the surge online. In Pete's office, the blinds stayed drawn. On Jasmine's side of the aisle, staffers watched the metrics tick upward in real time. This wasn't just support, it was momentum. And momentum, once it starts rolling, can flatten anything in its path. The next morning, the hearing reconvened. The cameras were already rolling when Jasmine walked in, carrying nothing but her notes and a neatly folded American flag. She didn't glance at Pete as she took her seat. She simply set the flag down on the table between them, the navy cloth sharp against the polished wood. The room shifted. Every lens in the place leaned closer, the zoom motors whispering as they tried to capture the moment. Pete's eyes flickered toward the flag. Quick, involuntary, before locking straight ahead. He didn't speak. He didn't even breathe loud enough for the mic to catch. Jasmine rested her palm gently on the flag, her fingers tracing the seam as though grounding herself in its weight. "This flag has been in my family's hands since 1944, she said, voice steady. It draped the coffin of a man who gave his life for a country that never wrote his name on its wall." She let the words hang in the air. No rush to fill the silence. Pete shifted in his seat, but still didn't look at her. The red light on the main camera blinked steadily, broadcasting his refusal to meet her gaze to millions. In the gallery, someone's phone screen glowed with the live stream, already filling with comments. Jasmine didn't need to say more. The image, a folded flag between them, one hand claiming it, the other refusing to acknowledge it, told the story better than any speech could. And sometimes the most devastating blows don't come from shouting. They come from making the other side sit in the quiet. The room was already heavy with the sight of that folded flag when Rep. Jamie Raskin leaned into his microphone. "Mr. Chairman," he said, his tone firm but measured, "I move that this committee censure Secretary Hegseth for conduct unbecoming of his office." The words landed like a gavel before the gavel. Across the dais, a few Republican members exchanged uneasy glances. Then, one by one, a handful raised their hands in support. The vote was called, and the tally lit up on the screen. Motion carried. For the first time that day, Pete's mask cracked, just slightly. Jasmine waited for the noise to settle. When it did, she spoke without looking at the cameras, her eyes fixed on Pete. "You didn't lose today because of me," she said, her voice steady, but edged with finality. "You lost because your truth couldn't survive history." The room held still. Pete didn't answer. He gathered his papers with mechanical precision, the sound of the folder snapping shut echoing in the quiet. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without a word, the folded flag still sitting between them. In the gallery, someone whispered, "It's over." But watching Pete disappear through the double doors, Jasmine knew this wasn't an ending. Not yet, because the fight she just fought in this room was the same fight still raging outside it. And as the cameras pulled back for the closing shot, her words echoed like a challenge, not just to Pete, but to the country itself. Whose blood built your country? And why are we still proving it? There are debts not recorded in ledgers, but folded into flags and etched in the names left behind. Keeping those memories alive is not just honoring the past, it's protecting a promise for the generations to come. And sometimes the strongest way to keep that promise is to quietly stand up at the moment it matters most. Will you be ready when it's your turn? If Clarence's story and Jasmine's stand hit you in the gut, don't just scroll away. Like, share, and subscribe to First Shock, where the truth hits first. Tap the bell, because the next voice might be yours. Tell us in the comments, if this were your family's flag, would you stay silent? If your answer is no, be ready, the next fight is coming. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching.